Hi, I'm Jonathan Bennett, and today on FLOSS Weekly, I'm joined by Randal Schwartz, and we're going to talk about Hotrock, a data aggregation platform that has been open sourced. Stay tuned to FLOSS Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Jonathan Bennett and Randal Schwartz, recorded Wednesday, November 6th, 2019. Hotrock. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV provides IT training that's effective and entertaining with access to virtual labs and practice tests. Visit go.itpro.tv/floss for an additional 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. Use code FLOSS30 at checkout. And by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab, with more than $500 million of equipment, including solutions from key partners like VMware, and it's virtual so you can access it 24/7. To learn more and get insights into all that it offers, go to wwt.com/twit. Hello and welcome to FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, library, and open source software. Maybe we should change that to open source stuff because of the occasional hardware show. But today is not a hardware show. Today is a software show. And again, it's going to be, as it normally is, one of those shows where you either are already using it or it's something that you absolutely have to have in your life and you'll go download it and play with it directly after the show. Today, we are talking to the guys from Hotrock, which if you've got a bunch of computers, maybe is something you're interested in. I am, of course, not your normal host, but your host for today. I am Jonathan Bennett, and I'm here from the corporate headquarters in the flyover state of Oklahoma. And I do have today a lovely and talented co-host, Mr. Randal Schwartz. Hey, Randal.
Hey, hi, it's me. The problem is I have a bad video connection right now, so I am just going to be a still picture for the show.
Ah, Mr. Still Picture himself. Well, that is all right. We will make it work. So, exactly. Hotrock. Randal, what do you know about Hotrock?
Absolutely nothing, except that it's going to be a show that we're going to do. We're going to be talking about events, alerts, metrics, happens at every turn. Hotrock seeks to address the challenge of transforming raw logs and alerts and time series into real intelligence data without the traditional limitations of scale, extensibility, and high cost. That's all I know.
So the idea here is you've got computers, you've got machines, you have a whole lot of data coming back from those machines, usually in the form of logs and such like that. And trying to keep up with all of that data is, well, it very quickly becomes overwhelming for one or two or a few people to manage. And it seems like Hotrock is one of those projects where it tries to take all of these different data sources, accumulate them, figure out what's important, and then present it to you so that you can just glance at, I'm assuming, a dashboard and be able to understand immediately, here's the state of my machines, here are the things I need to deal with, everything's going well, here's how much maybe even we're using of what we've got out there. It sounds like a neat project. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. Any further comments, Randal, before we move on?
Well, you know, and this is the point, is like, for example, we have a lot of data that we're generating at ZipRecruiter. I'm trying to remember where my current paycheck is coming from. But we have a lot of data we're generating. And the problem with that is, like, we have to somehow reduce that data to something where we're looking for the issues, and I'm guessing that Hotrock could actually help us with that. So that's nice.
Yes, and rather than us continuing to guess about it, we have a couple of experts that we can bring in. Before we do that, though, we have an important announcement to make. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by IT Pro TV. And enjoy learning with IT Pro TV's edutainers who blend education and entertainment to make learning IT engaging and fun in an interactive talk show format. So it's a big month for Microsoft announcements. You can use IT Pro TV to get the certifications you need to become a Microsoft professional. IT Pro TV has more than 800 hours of Microsoft training, including Microsoft Azure. IT Pro TV is so versatile they can help you and your team get certified IT training in all sectors, including government, managed services, healthcare, education, tech, finance, insurance, and even more. They are the official video training partner for CompTIA, and they have 12 CompTIA on-demand courses, including CompTIA's A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus certifications. Become a part of IT Pro TV's family with either a standard membership, video only, or a premium membership, which includes the videos, labs, and practice tests. Don't wait. Visit go.itpro.tv/floss and use code FLOSS30 for an additional 30% off. That's go.itpro.tv/floss. Use FLOSS30 for 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. IT Pro TV. Build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. And so now let's bring Troy McSimov and Josh Mahar to the show. Hey, Troy,
Thanks.
How are you?
Outstanding. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. And Josh, welcome to the show as well.
Thank you.
All right. Josh, where are you speaking to us from?
Right next to Troy. We're here in the great state of Texas, Dallas area.
Ah, right next to each other. And Troy, if you're right next to each other, I guess you're also in the Dallas area.
Yes. We're here in our Technology Spa offices sponsoring the Hotrock project.
Awesome. I see a whiteboard behind one of you guys. Hopefully there's no secret sauce written on that whiteboard. You know, we'll have investigators looking at it and trying to figure things out.
No, I erased all the important stuff, so.
Okay, there we go. Zoom and enhance. All right, so tell us about Hotrock. Give us the 30,000-foot view, and then what did we get right and what did we get wrong in the intro?
No, that was a great intro. I'll touch on a couple use cases with you guys and then let Josh dive into the technical aspects. What we found in working with our customers over the last couple of years as they've gone on this cloud journey and adopted a cloud-first approach, the struggles of data overwhelm and being able to centrally consolidate data across different SaaS providers, different cloud platforms, internal platforms, became quite a challenge, which led to us initiating in sponsorship of the Hotrock project that is now an open source a solution that we've launched probably about 2 months ago. And the three use cases that we found across a lot of the customers were, one, just a simple improved need for efficiencies in IT service management. So the ability to, as you guys mentioned, consolidate all of the events that are happening across different SaaS providers, different cloud platforms, on-prem platforms, different systems, in a way that would bubble up information that was relevant and important, and log or mask information that wasn't as relevant and important. That led to greater efficiencies, put information in front of people to triage incidents and so forth. The second use case was just this growing need for compliance. We're finding that more and more compliance around centralized logging of privileged use for transactional data, across different types of systems. And we find a lot of these providers do some level of logging and archiving, but not always meet the retention needs that may have been established within organizations. So the ability to consolidate that raw data and meet the requirements for retention that may be unique to different organizations was important. And as companies begin to sprawl across the cloud more and more, it becomes more difficult, not just the data overwhelm, but just the different locations of where data comes from. And then third was, this need for tools consolidation. And this was an important one that we found as we began this journey. There are a number of products out there that are focused on security in the SIEM space, or applications in the APM space, or monitoring tools. And oftentimes those are deployed in silos. The security teams will deploy a SIEM and put their hands around that tool. They'll hold onto that data. They don't share what comes out of that data that may be useful to other companies. The ability to still secure data was important, but the ability to share data where appropriate was powerful. The ability to consolidate these tools, share information, and centralize budget was a great opportunity for organizations as well.
And Josh, I want to kick the same question over to you because I find sometimes the technical guy has a very different perspective on what a 30,000 foot view looks like. So feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was kind of built out of our own need for centralized aggregation of logs and metrics and everything. We're a DevOps shop under the hood, and therefore we have the responsibility of all those things Troy just mentioned: security, application health, infrastructure health, capacity, things like that. So we had our own problems with data overwhelm, especially as we spanned on-premise data centers, all three major cloud providers, all the way through the application stack from the physical and the virtual layer all the way up to the application delivery side. So how do we get all this information together and really have it all available across our teams, across our customers, and things like that? So, everyone here has probably heard about the Elk Stack. We are built on the Elastic Stack for the storage and analysis engine, but we knew we were going to quickly have challenges around how do we get this up and running quickly? How do we deploy it in a way that's scalable and extensible in the ways that we know we're going to need today and in the future? So under the hood, technically, this is something that's built on public cloud. It's open. It's a glue that pulls together a lot of different open source components, Elastic being part of it. We dropped the log stash, went with FluentD for the ingestion and parsing ability. And then we built it all on Kubernetes so that we could scale the platform both from a compute layer, but also from a pod and application level behind the scenes so that we can start bolting on other components that brought in data sources that we didn't even think of 6 months ago, like the events coming from Azure and Office 365. And we're starting to work with some serverless components as well that can enable us to scrape API data and things that Elastic or one product doesn't do out of the gate. So it put us in more control around our own destiny with the future state of how we're using this internally and for our future customers. So, yep.
Sure. Troy, probably a question for you. You mentioned that this whole idea is only 2 months old. Is that correct?
No, over the last couple of years, we've had initiatives to solve complex problems around logging and application data, compliance data. It was 2 months ago that we formally launched as an open source community project. So we've had this running on our shared client platform for well over a year and working with a number of customers to implement in their environments today.
What kind of challenges did you find going from it sounds like kind of a proprietary solution and then saying, well, let's open this up to the public? What did that transition look like?
It was I don't know that so much of a challenge in actually launching as an open source community project. We brought on a senior advisor that had some experience in this space and helped us through that journey. What was more difficult was the decision that led up to going open source. Some of the things that we considered, contributing back to the community, the ability to advance development through expedited build of catalog connectors and so forth with the community contributions, and also the support from the community to support the solution as they got implemented into customers. And ultimately what led us down this path with our customers was a higher value solution than what's on the market today because of the use of open source. And as we built all of this, as Josh put it, glue to pull these things together, we felt it best to contribute it right back to the open source community as did those that put some of the components to open source that we're using in the solution.
Mm-hmm. And so how does Hotrock and how does Technology Spa, how do you guys make your money? What's your business model look like?
Sure. So ideally, we're solving problems for our customers through a variety of ways, and we're gaining a lot of trust with our customers that pull us into increased scope within our existing engagements and word of mouth and recommendations. So the work that we've been doing around customization and integration, some of this cloud broker layer that's focused on, again, service integration, aggregation, customization, governance, has been really big for us, and Hotrock being one of those key elements. Contributing to the open source community still allows us to provide those professional services and sponsor the program, get awareness, provide enterprise support agreements, and customization that's needed in this space. It still provides the flexibility to avoid vendor lock-in for the customers that want to use a product like this and build their own in-house expertise. But being subject matter experts in this space allows us to help companies through their journey as they bring this in-house.
Sure. So what is the if someone just wants to go grab Hotrock itself, is there anything missing? Obviously, there's a lot of work and a lot of time that someone has to put into to make all of this work. It's true with any project. But if they just go grab the open source Hotrock and implement it themselves, is there anything technically that they're missing out on, like any technical features, versus actually coming to you guys and paying for it?
No, out of the gate, this is something you can go to GitHub, download. You do need a little bit of exposure and knowledge to technologies like Terraform for the infrastructure as code and some of the Amazon services that we're relying on. But it's a fully functional product. We had one of our own in-house engineers download it and run it and had it up and running within 30 minutes. So it just shows to the power. Out of the gate, it is a fully functional collection stack. It's ready to start receiving data and provides you a Kibana interface to visualize the data. We've got a couple of templated dashboards in the system that allow you to start looking at the data real time as it comes in. But there's nothing technically missing or gaps in the solution itself as far as getting it up and running quickly.
Excellent. And Josh, I'm glad you jumped in because that was kind of it's a business question and it's also a technical question. So, there's synergy here between you two guys.
Sure.
One of the things we find sometimes is, companies say, oh, open source is the next big thing. What code can we throw out there in open source? And, don't necessarily think through all of the questions of, well, is this actually usable? Is there a business case for doing this? And it sounds like you guys actually, before you released any code, it sounds like you guys sat down and actually thought through all of these things and came to some, as far as I can tell so far, some good conclusions.
That's correct. Yeah, nothing frustrates us more than half, started threads on boards around ideas and things that just weren't fully realized. So we set out to make sure this was something that was feasible. We were using it in-house, drinking our own sauce, so to speak, and that it was providing value at the end of the day. It wasn't just another collection of tooling. So the fact that we were able to use it and see value day one, we took that and basically did what we're using in-house and what you see on the open source is not very, very different at all. We did extend it with some tools in-house to monitor the health of the platform. We're starting to work on releasing that component as well into our next 1.2 release so that the open source community can take advantage of not just getting the platform up and running, but once you're running, how do you make sure that it's healthy and you're not missing out on data streams and things like that. So we're continuing to, as we make progress and add on features internally, that's just translating right back out to the what we have out on GitHub.
Yeah, and I'd like to add and echo into what Josh said. The work that Brian Bradley has done with us, he's the BDFL on the open source community project, the Benevolent Dictator for Life. He's done a great job in creating the documents for corporate sponsorship, for individual sponsorship, for enabling onboarding and preparing the project for those to contribute from the community. And so we were able to fast track, once we decided to go open source, fast track those efforts and launch pretty quickly. So I've been very happy with that progress.
Excellent. So we warned you guys that this is done live. I'm not sure if we mentioned we also have a live chat room where people can listen and ask questions. And we have a question. Virgil wants to know, what kind of security does the data flow have?
Great question. That was one of our requirements day one, is we want to make sure that all the messages being shipped and stored were done securely. So at the ingestion layer, we have a FluentD receiver that accepts only TLS encrypted streams with authentication tokens. So you can't send data to the platform. The listener is actually public, and the way we control that is through those two mechanisms. So everything in flight coming from a source system has to be wrapped in that FluentD TLS wrapper using Secure Forward. And then behind the scenes, as we ingest, aggregate, and store it to disk, we're using disk-based encryption within Amazon to ensure that all the data at rest is encrypted. Additionally, we are using Kibana and spaces within the Elastic Stack so that each data silo within the Elastic system is controlled by departments or customers in our case, so that we are controlling exactly where the data is landing on the Elasticsearch cluster, and then providing the authentication mechanism within Kibana to ensure that only authorized people have access to query and use the data silo. So we're controlling not just how the data is shipped and stored, but also how it's accessed and reported upon behind the scenes once it's ingested and aggregated.
So following up on this this question, kind of beginning to dive into the technical details of this, to start with, what what data sources are we talking about? Is this limited to just looking at log files, or are there other data sources that are included?
Pretty much you name it, we are either bringing it in today, or we have on our roadmap the ability to bring it in. So out of the gate, it includes everything you would traditionally think of: flat log files, WinLog beats on a Windows system. So we're pulling in event logs. We're starting to work with the APM feature set within Elastic, so we can pull in real-time transaction data from applications. We can pull in JSON information and database auditing through a couple different of techniques. Security information. So the current release we have out on GitHub extends through Wazaa. So we have some OSSec ability to do CVE detection and report on PCI data. Additionally, I believe the 1.1 release that's out there now also includes a Microsoft Cloud App Security Agent, so that we're pulling in data streams from Microsoft. And think of this as not just raw log data, but more events. So, for example, things like impossible travel activity or things that are triggered inside of Azure Cloud come in. And it's really powerful to be able to correlate that information with things that might be happening on-prem or across your Active Directory or Azure environments. Trying to think what else. There's on the Amazon side, we're pulling in CloudTrail, CloudFront logs, as well as VPC flow logs, which look very much like firewalls. So we're able to overlap firewall information inside of cloud VPCs as well as on-prem firewalls. So that's just a sampler. We have a list of about, I'd say, 60 or 80 other integrations, which focus not heavily on traditional infrastructures, but more on a variety of cloud, PaaS, and SaaS services that generate their own raw log streams, metrics, and events that we're going to pull in as well, solely for the means of having everything in one place and being able to present dashboards that overlap and span all these different enterprise systems and teams that want to see this data.
You support the old SNMP data types to be able to pull in things like temperatures and data load and all of that?
Absolutely. Yep. We can do active polling as well as pushing. So it just depends on what that data source is, if we're going to reach in and pull it, or we need to use an agent to push the data out. That's kind of the diversity is being able to get the data in ways that we can adapt to. So that's particularly a challenge in Amazon Cloud, where how they expose the data, you may only have a certain number of tools to be able to work with. So at the end of the day, we have to support that in some way.
Mm-hmm. And probably again for Josh, what are you looking for in all of this data? Like, what sorts of events do we want to let people know about? Are we talking like hard drive failures? Are we talking an attacker has root on your system? Are we talking you're using a lot of RAM, you might want to think about upgrading? What scenarios are you guys looking for?
All three and then some. Day one, when we turned it on, we immediately saw brute force login attempts against a website that was protected with basic auth. It was happening before. We didn't really realize it because no one was on the system looking at those logs. That in particular was coming from the Windows Event Viewer. So we were not only able to see that activity, but the volume at which that was occurring. Previously, it would have been downloading text files and running it through Excel or something like that, which is a horrible way to do it. So in terms of the dashboards that we have built into what's deployed from GitHub, I think that gives a best representation of what we think security teams, infrastructure teams, cloud teams are going to want to see right off the bat. Things like firewall trends, like I want to see changes in baseline deny activity. I want to see top 10 attacking IPs. I want to see VPN tunnel failures or network traffic. I can see all that inside dashboards like the one that's provided from the infrastructure level. On the security side, we can overlap things more at an application level, like I mentioned, authentication failures, specific transaction URIs that are peaking, things like 404, 301 redirects, things like that that might show atypical behavior in an application that isn't normally detected because you don't have tools like this, or you have siloed tools that you have to switch between to bring things together. So in this sense, we can use one tool to overlap multiple data sources in one dashboard and really see the trending as well as the correlation across different types of data streams.
And then is there ability to be active as a response to this data? Like just examples that come to mind. Can you make a phone call to a developer and say, hey, this is what's happened? Like automatically, can we text or phone call somebody and say, this is what's happening, we need a human to come look at it? Or alternatively, could this system automatically do something like shut down a machine if it detects that there's a problem? Is that in scope?
Yep, absolutely. Today, we are extended into ServiceNow. We have a component called ElastAlert, which sits on top of the whole solution, and you can define thresholds and baseline deviations and say, hey, that's not just noise, that's actionable, and I need to take this action on it. Right now, that's an email or an API call. So extending that to be like an API call to Twilio to make a phone call is not well beyond the realm of possibilities. We're also working on extending OpenFOSS to do serverless calls to do things like, hey, shut down a machine, or I need to do something that's not a phone call or an email-based action. So you got to be careful with those, right? You don't want the system necessarily taking automation too far, but just having the ability there to write the rules and the logic to say, when this happens, react for me automatically. And that's really important, because at the end of the day, this is a tremendous amount of volume. Even just having it in one place is great, but you can't put a team of 50 people on there watching dashboards and being reactive to it. You want the system to do that for you. So all the components are there to be able to do that.
And so that's a very nice segue to the next question I wanted to ask. Do you guys do anything with artificial intelligence, or is this all manually written rules? So how you mentioned this idea of trying to determine the signal out of the noise, and that's something that projects like TensorFlow were designed to tackle. Is that something you guys have looked into or used?
That is on our very near roadmap. We have determined as a team that we do not want to be in the rule writing business. I mean, that's a losing battle. So we've started to toy in-house with LoudML, which is an open source machine learning capability to do that baseline deviation detection, so that any kind of time series information that we're plotting out or trending information, we just want to know when a spike occurs. Even if it's not represented on a visual, hey, alert us that this is atypical activity, and we don't have to write any rules. It's automatic built in. Additionally, in this quarter, we want to start pulling in some sources of data enrichment, things like threat intel feeds, bad actor IPs, and things like that, and not write rules that correlate that information with what we're seeing on our system, but having components. There's one from Apache, I can't remember the name, but we're looking at pulling that in to tie in those data streams, those RSS feeds with showing, hey, we've got a bad actor IP, and that particular IP is now showing up on our firewall logs. Let's send off an alert. So we don't have to write a rule for that. That's just correlating between known threats that are happening in across the world and what we're actually seeing on the platforms we're monitoring. So that kind of lends itself towards AI in the sense that we're having the platform do the work for us. We're not looking to write rules across every different scenario, because that's not a winning battle.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've picked Josh's brain about technology and the tech questions, and I'm sure we'll ask some more business-related questions. And Randal wants to jump in on this as well. But before we get to that, we do have an important announcement. This episode of Floss Weekly was brought to you by Worldwide Technology. WWT began building their Advanced Technology Center 10 years ago, and it has grown exponentially. It's like no other testing and research lab. The lab contains more than $500 million with a B dollars in equipment from hundreds of OEMs and key partners, ranging from high-tech heavyweights like VMware, Dell EMC, and even Microsoft, to emerging disruptors like Equinix. WWT is a trusted partner who stays with you over the years. Many of their customers have been with them for over a decade because they know WWT is where they can go to get the answers they need to make sure their business runs right. Their ATC is an incubator for IT innovation and offers on-demand and schedulable labs like VMware Cloud on AWS, along with hundreds of other labs represent the newest advances in network virtualization, software-defined data center, security, digital workspace, multi-cloud architecture and automation, and more. Learn about the products before you launch. WWT's engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proofs of concept and pilots using the sandbox so customers can confidently select the best solutions. In many cases, this reduces concept time from months to weeks, which increases speed to market. They offer Lab as a Service, a dedicated lab space within the ATC. Here, customers can perform programmatic testing and use the vast technology ecosystem that WWT has already built. It's virtual, so you can take full advantage of ATC's unique benefits anywhere in the world 24/7. WWT engineers work in these labs every day, beta testing new solutions based on the latest and greatest VMware technologies, building reference architectures and custom integrations to help their customers make decisions and see results faster and with much less investment. WWT has launched their new digital platform encompassing the ATC ecosystem. This ecosystem creates a multiplier effect of knowledge, speed, and agility anytime, anywhere around the world for their customers. Get access to articles, case studies, hands-on labs, and other tools that make the difference in today's fast-paced world. To learn more about ATC and get insights into their newest features, go to wwt.com/twit. WWT simplifies the complex. That's wwt.com/twit. WWT, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. And we thank WWT for their sponsorship. And now over to Randal to ask a few questions.
What is this for? Why are people using this? Either of you.
Sure. Like we stated before, the growing need for compliance, the growing need for greater efficiencies in service management, the growing need to reduce risk as companies decentralize and begin to use cloud services are growing by leaps and bounds. But overwhelmingly, it's to address data overwhelm. There's a significant amount of data that's hitting users, and they just don't have the tools, or they have tools that are becoming too expensive. There's a lot of third-party products multiple products that together do a lot of what Hotrock's doing, but the cost of ownership is growing beyond what's reasonable, and it's what really creates the true value of Hotrock.
And there's a lot of other players in this space. So why are you better?
So what we've seen with a lot of the other players, whether they're third-party products that are offered as SaaS solutions or license subscriptions or other open source tools, we haven't seen one that collectively offers a lot of out-of-the-box experience and the rapid deployment capabilities that is open source, that removes vendor dependencies, that allows customers to take this internal and own if they want. It's really about the best value-based solution that we've seen on the market.
And I mean, that's always the problem. It's like you're up against other people. So what, how are you going to differentiate yourself from those?
Sure. The exposure of the solution is the first step, right? Get this into the hands of the community. Let the open source community add to the catalog of connectors. We believe that with adoption, the pace in which the catalog of connectors grows will far outpace what a lot of the third-party providers are doing. And then more importantly, get into different universities and get this added into curriculum where students can learn more about open source and take that with them through their careers and leverage those tools coming out of these programs. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to create the awareness, a great experience with educators as well as businesses that have this need.
Okay. And so that's going to be your differentiator.
Yeah, Josh, would you like to add on more on the technical?
Please.
I think, as Troy mentioned, the list of integrations is one of the key differentiators because, there are commercial off-the-shelf products, ones that, have different ranges of costs. And what we saw on customers that already had something like this is it was partially deployed, or it was deployed and not being used for one reason or another because you were almost at the mercy of the producer to, you were limited by what they could and couldn't integrate with. Here, we've really given that control back to the operator to say, hey, I want to extend it in this way or this fashion. And because everything's built on open source and glue today, adding another loosely coupled component is always right there and available to you. And as we continue to grow that list of available connectors, it's going to set itself more and more apart from other solutions out there while continuing to be open source based.
So I want to jump back in, and I've got some questions for Troy. We've picked Josh's brain. I mentioned about the technical issues, but there's some business and licensing issues I wanted to ask Troy about. And first off, when you guys released this as open source, what license did that get released under?
Oh, I'd have to look that up. It's one of the GNU licensing models. Like I mentioned, Brian Bradley helped us with setting up he's the BDFL, setting up the program. We went through a number of different options and chose one of the G and U options. I don't recall off the top of my head which one we landed with, but that's all published in the GitHub project.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've seen recently around even GPL projects is this idea of, if Amazon really likes it, I hate to pick on Amazon here, but they're kind of the elephant in the room. If Amazon really likes it, they're big enough that they could just implement it themselves, take our open source code, implement it themselves, and run us out of the business. Is that something that you guys have thought through or worry about?
No, that's a great question, and it's something we did think about, not just Amazon, but any provider that sees this and says we can recreate the same thing. One of the things that we looked at was the ability to have this in multiple regions for GDPR purposes or different cloud providers or on-prem. One of the costs related to doing something like this is data out. You're getting all the data out of your locations into wherever the centralized logging location would be. So AWS and Microsoft are doing similar things today. The challenge is, if your data is not in AWS or in Microsoft and largely resides somewhere else, having the ability to move this centralized logging location closer to your data, or doing so in such a way that you can decentralize and regionalize where data is stored for, again, GDPR and compliance purposes, was very important. I don't think any one provider would be a solution for all companies out there. So having the flexibility of being able to move your solution or choose where you want it was part of the things that separates the solution from some of the others.
And so when we talk about logging information and pulling all of this data together, one of the things that comes to mind is we've seen some security stories from big players where they accidentally do things like spit people's passwords out into the log in plain text. And this kind of brings, hopefully no one does that anymore, but it brings to mind this idea of what if some of this logged information is private or should only have certain eyes on it? Is that a case that you guys support?
Yeah, that's a great question, and not only do we solve that problem through the solution, I'll talk about that in a minute, but we also help bubble up that information that's happening in other platforms. So if you're having this issue in one of your cloud platforms or through Windows Defender, it can report usage of applications on the internet that have become compromised. We're alerted on those incidents, even if it's not a third-party product that we manage. Just knowing that our users were accessing those services, and those services became vulnerable, we get notified of those things and they bubble up through the system. Now, as it relates to the data stored within Hotrock, as Josh mentioned, he's able to silo it through silos and indexes different data that's coming in from different sources, and able to put an RBAC model on top of that to ensure that only people that have access or the need to have access to that data have so. We can do that to isolate teams, but also carve out data across the layers to provide more transparency and start to break down silos where appropriate, where that's been a challenge in the past.
Mm-hmm. Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think your question was more around possibly data scrubbing as well, which is something that's on our near-term roadmap to be able to identify things like credit card numbers, PII information, social security numbers in line at the parsing level, and have an option to be able to scrub or obfuscate those in line. That solves a lot of the problems of dealing with storing that information, because a lot of times that doesn't necessarily lend itself to being able to manage the platform any better than before. I don't need to see that information to do that, but that's on a case-by-case decision basis. And if we do need to keep the integrity of that information for whatever reason, we can isolate where it's stored. And of course, all that is still shipped encrypted and encrypted at rest as well.
Mm-hmm. Josh, Troy mentioned something that made my spider sense tingle. He mentioned this idea of we can see if you've visited, I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but something like if you've used web applications that are known to be compromised. And it comes to mind, it almost sounds like you guys have accidentally built an antivirus. Is that fair?
In a way. So I think that specific example is leveraging technologies from Microsoft that are detecting that, but not necessarily doing that work on Hotrock, but bringing in that information of that activity into Hotrock to be able to correlate across other activities. So think of like endpoint device or MDM management within Microsoft actually doing that detection, but then overlapping that with other points of information across my environment from an end user standpoint to show yes, this application was vulnerable, this user's running it, but I want to know what my scope of impact was from that event. I can see what that user actually did, other applications or systems that user might have access to, and be able to bring all that together. So I can completely assess the overall impact of having that event triggered in the first place.
Now, do you guys also track like the library versioning and binary versioning that's installed on a system? So if there's a CVE that gets released that targets a specific version, that you immediately know that and can inform someone, hey, you need to go do an update.
Yep, I mentioned Wazaa earlier with the OSSec agent. It does do file integrity monitoring, so we can pick up changes to file, not just like configure files, but also DLLs and things like that. It can also detect known vulnerable libraries on the system and report on those mapped against known CVE vulnerabilities. So that's more at a core operating system level, where we have traditional VMs and things like that running. That becomes more complicated as we have applications that don't have a VM backing, things like containers and serverless functions in cloud. So right now we're working on extending that kind of CV detection all the way further up the stack where we don't have VMs running the system. So that's a challenge we're actively dealing with right now.
Sure. To circle back just a little bit, someone just whispered a question into my ear, and that is, how do you differentiate when information is personally identifiable and when it shouldn't be included in a log, maybe even for a GPRD, for the purpose of complying with GPRD? What does the software do to be able to differentiate those two types of data?
So go ahead, Troy.
No, I was going to say, in some cases, we're leveraging the capabilities of native cloud providers that are providing a lot of this data. So Microsoft is a great example. They do a great job of deploying DLP capabilities that will look for information like credit card numbers, social security numbers, certain confidential and private information. And through identifying that, not only does it become alert and fed into the system, but it also allows us to ensure that we don't include some of those data where it's not relevant into the logs. Josh, what were we going to say?
I was just going to mention that I mentioned FluentD earlier as our ingesting and parsing layer, and there are filters built into that to detect private or personally identifiable information like credit card numbers, social security numbers. Now, as far as what you do with that, if you want to obfuscate it, that can be done inline at the source system and not all the way at the ingestion layer. So we have the capability of either dropping that on the floor or scrubbing it in different ways. But to the point, how do we detect it? How do we know it's there? We don't go and look for it. We want the system to show us that information is built in. So, yeah, email addresses, credit card numbers, physical addresses, social security numbers, all that kind of stuff is detectable through the FluentD parsing engine.
So to turn that question on its head, one of the things that we see again in the news is what happens when a government has a warrant that says we need to see your logs to be able to figure out what someone was doing. How does that play into this system?
Yep, another great question. So if we have a compliance obligation to store that information, we do it in a wise way. And because we're on Amazon, we have a component that actually takes the data and backs it up into S3 and then Glacier for long-term archival storage. So for that specific compliance, think like baking industries and whatnot that need to hold this data for 7 years, right? So how do you even deal with something like that? So because we're on cloud, we can store information and keep it encrypted at rest. But also have it available to us through secured means.
So you probably end up having to have a scrubbed version that your engineers put their eyes on to see if there's a problem, and then an unscrubbed version that gets saved in case there's ever a case where you have to go back and find that information. Is that how that works?
Yep, exactly. So we can fork the information stream. We can say, hey, I want to store this information for real-time analysis, but scrub the data. But then when we bring it in, we can also send it to an index that's duplicated. It's not used for reporting. It can't be queried. It's strictly meant for long-term storage of the raw data for that exact scenario.
Mm-hmm. And then we've talked about cloud providers. We've talked about AWS, and you guys mentioned Microsoft Azure. What about actual bare metal servers? If someone wanted to do like an on-premises install of Hotrock, is that something you support?
Absolutely. It does require Kubernetes. We are based. Everything that runs on the system runs as a pod. We use Helm charts to build specific components that don't already have Helm charts or a supplied mechanism for that. So it does require you running Kubernetes on premise, but that's the only requirement. So that can run on top of bare metal. It can run on top of virtual machines that also run on bare metal. It's very, very flexible.
So we have another question from the chat room, and I think we may have touched a nerve by this line of questioning. Jojo Dancer says, question is, do they store the information? If they do, can they not give it to the authorities? And I think he's getting at this question about, we have services out there that claim that either they don't do any logging or they're not going to give your logs up. And boy, there's been some times when people have made those claims. It's come out that no, they were logging everything and they gave it over. I'm sure that's a topic that you guys have had to think through and wrestle with. What does that conversation look like for you guys?
Well, one of the reasons why we deployed this as an open source community project and not offer as a SaaS solution like a lot of other customers have done was just for this purpose, to give control back to the end users and the companies to determine how they deal with situations like this. Given that they put this in their own environment or their own tenant account in cloud, they're in control of that data and get to determine how they respond to those types of queries of information.
So if someone is paying you guys for the service, do you generally store the data yourselves, or does that happen on the customer's solutions and accounts, or is that something that can be configured depending upon what a customer wants to do?
So for the services that we're providing on our shared platform, we don't have that running in an environment that has private, sensitive information. For the other cases, they are customers that have downloaded this in their own environment, their own tenant accounts in cloud, and we're helping to support through managed services.
Okay. And then we're actually starting to run out of time. It's been a very interesting discussion, but we have some questions that we always like to ask, and one of them is kind of a joke question most of the time, but I think there's a possibility that we'll get a serious answer. Do you guys use blockchain as part of this solution?
We
Josh,
do
you
not.
want to address that?
No, we don't.
Is that something that you've thought about?
No, we have not thought about it. So it's great. It's stirring up some ideas in my mind about how we could possibly use that to tie the storyline of an event together by relating like information as it comes into the system. So that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, when so many people think of blockchain, they immediately think of Bitcoin and coinage. And it's like, well, no, there are other things that you can do with the blockchain idea. I mean, somebody blew my mind when they said Git is essentially a blockchain. It's like, well, yeah, I guess it is in a way. All right, and then we have our two final questions, and I'm not sure if these will apply to Troy. I'm not sure how much of a programmer he is, but if he wants to, he can sure answer. Troy, what text editor do you spend all day in?
Oh, that's a good question, and no, I'm not a programmer, but I'd have to say I'm trying to think early on some of the tools I may have used. Gosh, I'm just drawing blanks. I've been very hands-off keyboard these days, so I'll pass the question over to Josh.
Sadly, I seem to spend a lot of time in Notepad++, but I'm switching more to just Visual Studio Code for everything. In terms of looking at code and doing syntax highlighting and debugging. So
Visual Studio Code is surprisingly often get that as an answer. It's surprising, but boy, a lot of people like it.
I approve of that. It's Visual Studio Code is amazing. It's one of the open source things that has come out of Redmond that is awesome. Visual Studio Code. So just calling it a good thing.
Yep, it's turning some of our hardcore Linux players over to Microsoft as well. So that has to say something, right?
Well, why would you object to Microsoft? I mean, seriously, if they're going to generate stuff like Visual Studio Code, why would you object to that?
Oh, I absolutely do not. I think it speaks to Microsoft's change in just what we've seen in the last couple of years. They're really adopting more open source and attracting a lot more of the communities out there.
Indeed. All right. So just interjecting here because I can. This is my show, so I can do this.
Yup. All right, Josh. Second question for you: what scripting language or programming language do you turn to when you get the chance?
You name it. I not just me, but more my team. It's really about finding the right tool for the job. So doing a lot with Node.js on the serverless side, Python, and I mentioned Terraform earlier. So the HCL language when we do infrastructure as code. I'd say we're starting to actually do a lot more with PowerShell as well, because it is it's really powerful on our Microsoft stacks and our Windows systems. So you name it, it's more about the right tool for the job. So what you see in Hotrock and the code is a combination of all those things I just mentioned, and so trying to standardize on just one, I don't think that's something we try and do. We use the right tool for the job.
I like that. I like that much better than trying to fit the round peg of a certain language into a square hole. Troy, do you do enough programming these days to even have an opinion on which programming language is your favorite? Or are we going to pass on that one as well?
No, I would definitely pass that over to Josh. I will say that I did look up while Josh was answering some of your questions quite well. The licensing model we chose for the open source was the GNU Pharo General Public License version 3.
Oh, you went with AGPL. Okay, that's really interesting. So we talked about this question of Amazon taking people's code and using it, and I've made the comment several times that the AGPL is written specifically to prevent that kind of an instance, because there's the GPL loophole, and that is, well, if the code is not running on your computer, then we don't have to give it to you. And the AGPL says, well, no, if you're interacting with this code at all, you have all of the rights that the GPL gives you. So that's really neat to see, actually.
Great. It's good to hear that.
And then I do. It's kind of our one of our boilerplate questions, and that is, and we'll start with Troy on this one. What did we not ask you about that you wanted to make sure that our audience gets to hear about? And this is kind of difficult because you have to think about everything that we've talked about and everything you wanted to talk about and do some set math to see where they overlap and they don't. But what did we miss?
Yeah, I'd say the one big question is, how can the community get involved? We're currently working on an onboarding experience so that whether it's educators or developers that want to jump right in to this space, learn more about event intelligence, how they can contribute, understand the taxonomy of the data, and really fast track that onboarding experience to contribute into the project. Keep an eye out on hotrock.io for those developments, and we'll be publishing some onboarding campaigns here shortly.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Josh, is there anything that you were just burning to get out that we didn't ask you about?
Yeah, I'd say the big one is we're very much a team and collaborative focused environment here. So I really encourage everyone to take a look at what's on GitHub, and we'd love to hear about the experiences. We have our own experience, we have some of our customer experiences, but there's a lot of different use cases and applications. So if there's any ideas out there on ways we can extend it or things that we just haven't thought of, we'd love to hear them. So I'm sure there'll be ways to provide that feedback.
All right, excellent. Well, we have been talking with Troy McSimov and Josh Mahar from Technology Spa, and specifically the Hotrock project. And I want to say thank you very much to both of you guys for coming and talking with us today.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
All right. Randal, what do you think?
Hey, this is amazing. This is amazing. The whole idea of this project is amazing. And I am happy to only sort of be virtually here because we've had a lot of stuff. We got a bunch of other wonderful projects coming up soon. We've got Kong coming up again. But they've rescheduled. So, but chez moi, it's got to be a Spanish word or a French word, helps you manage your personal configuration files. We've got LS Quick, which is the Quick library, which is an open source implementation of QUIC and HTTP3 functionality for servers and clients. We've got XWiki coming up soon, which is the first generation wikis who are used to collaborate on content, and second generation wikis were used to create collaborative web applications. Both of those are fun. Yogabyte coming up soon, which is a distributed database. Roll-a-Steam, which is a virtual tabletop software, going to be interesting. And Titan. And we just added Open Mainframe, so it's going to be fun. I don't have any notes on that as well. So if you have any other suggestions, please tell the project leader or the community coordinator to email me. If you go to twit.tv/floss, my address is there, particularly if it's not cryptocurrency, because we've kind of stuck with that. We have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays, live.twit.tv. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Twitter. You can follow me at Merlin on Twitter. And you can also join the new forum, just started a few weeks ago, twit.community. So if you go there, we'll talk about that. I don't have any particular plugs these days. Do you have any plugs?
So I'll mention that, again, every Friday, you can catch my security article over on hackaday.com, This Week in Security, where we go and we do kind of a wrap up on what's happened throughout the week. And then we also try to find at least one topic to do a bit of a deeper dive into. Go actually look at source code, look at CVEs, and sometimes mine out something that everybody else has missed. And so every Friday, come and check that out. But wow, that is the main thing that I've got going on to plug.
And Jonathan, thank you for actually picking up the hosting role today.
All right. And you can all join us next week on Floss Weekly. Thank you so much.
Yes.